Loads of you getting in touch about money, and I'm not surprised. Nigel says, you say a person working in catering on the rail services could struggle on $30,000 a year. I'm a clinical support worker in a busy mental health hospital and earn 23 grand. My wife, a healthcare worker in general nursing, earns 18 grand. We have the same high bills to pay and struggle like everyone else, but we can't all strike for massive pay rises and have to settle for 4.5% less than teachers and other services. This is the problem, isn't it? You can't have the whole country going on strike, and people like you, Nigel, really, really struggling. Jean says, good to see you both. I work as part of a cleaning team at the local college and would love to be offered a 5% pay rise. All we get is a mandatory yearly pay rise of about 50p an hour. Some people don't know how lucky they are. It's problematic, isn't it?
Thank you to you both for getting in touch. And we're particularly talking about cost of living today because there are another set of rail strikes kicking off today as 40,000 members of the RMT union in particular have said they're not coming to work today. So we'll be discussing that in more detail. But right now, to talk us through some of the other stories is former Chief Secretary of the Treasury, David Mellor, and broadcaster Clare Muldoon to go through the papers. A very good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
David, why don't we start with you? And the front page of the Daily Telegraph, Sunak screeching U-turn on tax cuts.
Yeah, I think there's an element of exaggeration in that. But, what else are they going to write about? I mean, I'm afraid this leadership election is becoming as boring as Love Island, and that really is sad.
But that's not boring at all, actually.
Well, I don't watch it. So,
I do.
I think voyeurism has never been a big thing with me. But Sunak screeching U-turn on tax cuts. I mean, what he has said is that he thinks that there could be a case for a temporary alleviation of VAT on energy bills. It's perhaps rather more soberly put in the Times. Sunak, I would ditch VAT on energy bills. But I think the problem, as somebody who is sympathetic to the Conservative Party but no longer much engaged with the Conservative Party, but was engaged with the Conservative Party when there were genuine issues over tax cuts. The problem here is that the people, the two leadership candidates seem to think that tax cuts is a bit like saying we're going to spend a few % more on the NHS. What they don't seem to appreciate is that tax cuts in a properly run economy is the reward you get when the expenditure comes back into balance, and there is therefore scope to give people some return on what they would otherwise have to pay in tax. And the problem is that it's absolutely not the case here. They should be putting taxes up, not down. That's sort of policy advocacy. It's just where they are at in terms of the out-of-control public expenditure in this country.
Yeah, well, it was funny. Remember last summer we had the crisis of fuel and everybody was filling up their cars, and it was driven, I think, in part, or a huge part, by the mainstream media that were saying, we're running out of fuel, need to get it. Yeah. The AA at the time were banging on saying, look, let's cut the fuel, the VAT, to the fuel at the pumps. Now, and everyone said, oh, actually, can we do that? Yes, you can. Shall we do that? No, we won't. Right? I don't think the VAT and I think the VAT and the energy bills is a knee-jerk reaction to something that could have been dealt with, helped with, aided much further back down the line than is now. And I'm sorry, I actually watched Love Island instead of the Leaders' Debate, because the Leaders' Debate has got nothing in part for me. I'm not affiliated to any political party. I don't know why we are giving so much time now to TV debates to two people that less than... what's the Conservative leadership now, David?
160,000.
Well, they say it's 160,000. I doubt it's even that. But you make a very good point. When I was a Conservative Member of Parliament, in my own constituency alone in Putney, we had membership between 3,000 and 5,000. Now, with 650 constituencies, they've got 160,000 members. And that's not an audited figure.
Yeah.
Why can't they tell us how many members they've got? They must know.
Because I don't think they do know.
They must know how many people pay
I think
for
we're talking
quid.
about a shambles, or only the better organised bits of shambles, I actually do think, and the worrying thing for the Conservative Party is, the sort of people who remain members are not necessarily what I would call mainstream. So allowing 0.2% of the British public to determine who the new Prime Minister should be. This is not in the best interest of...
I agree completely. Absolutely agree.
Well, so forgive me then. What are we meant to do? Have a general...
Well, exactly. I mean, who wants that right down the line?
What they should have done is realise that the Conservative Party has strained the tolerance of people. Because while everyone blames Boris, and of course he was the sort of, the man who really precipitated all the nonsense of the summer and so on. The reality is the Conservative Party itself has let itself down, and the Conservative Party should have got on with getting a new Prime Minister. And the best way to do that is let the people who basically know these folk better than anybody else, the members of Parliament, make the decision. And the problem is that Sunak would have won the members of Parliament vote, or likely to have done, but Truss will win the members' vote. So they start off immediately with an uncertainty about the real leader of the Conservative Party.
And in the interest of bias, I have to say, where is the Labour Party in all of this? The pages have been quiet, so quiet. The outside pages, the front pages, the inside pages, nothing about Keir Starmer's solutions or anything.
But this is the time for Labour to stay quiet, isn't it? And
is it?
Everything else happening.
And watch the Conservative Party throw bars
this is the
at each
moment
other.
when someone comes and says, Keir, what do you think? And he says, Keir Starmer, who's he? I don't really know him.
Thank you. Exactly.
Oh, well, let's have a look at COVID contracts in The Guardian.
Yeah, OK. So The Guardian's front page is Ministers played fast and loose, which is a direct quote from a committee, parliamentary committee, with £770 million in COVID contracts. Vis-a-vis, transfer that with the Financial Times covering of it. And they're dealing with one company here, Randox. And it was the fall of Owen Paterson, the MP, who lobbied for Randox. Randox paid him £100,000. And he allegedly lobbied Matt Hancock for them to get one of these PPE awards. But Randox say that their report is flawed, and they find, and in fact, a spokesman for Hancock said as well, this report completely exonerates ministers. It finds no wrongdoing. The Health Department said there are robust rules and processes in place to ensure that conflicts of interest do not occur. And then there is no evidence that the government's contracts with Randox were awarded improperly, as has been concluded by the National Audit Office, which in most part, directly contradicts this front page here. And I made a note, actually, of a quote that the PAC, which was the Public Accounts Committee, that said, even allowing for the exceptional circumstances at the start of the pandemic, basic civil service practices to document contract decision-making were not followed.
And indeed, let me just say straight away that at the beginning of this process, a friend of mine, a serious businessman in America, rang me up and said, could I help them get access to the Department of Health, because they did a lot of business with China. And I said, the last thing you want is somebody like me, a clapped-out old ex-politician, because that will immediately taint and contaminate your application.
Yeah.
You could have knocked me down with a feather when I found that if I had actually endorsed them, they'd have gone into a special category and were more likely to get it. The whole thing was flawed from the beginning.
Yep.
And, I smell the air, and there's a little stench of corruption in all of this, and there's no point in anybody thinking that this isn't a really serious issue, not just for the government, but for the country. We cannot have a situation where people can get awarded contracts because of who they know.
But that's not going to happen. I mean, look, there's always going to be disputes over how much this happened or not, but if nothing else, it's shone a light on it. It won't happen again.
We hope.
But there was a VIP fast track for the House of Lords that Michelle Mone used for PPE MedPro, and her house was raided on the Isle of Man. There is far more to this. But at the end of the day, we needed the PPE. Wherever it was from, it was a knee-jerk reaction. Everything seems to be so reactive. But I think that it was very important to say, even allowing for the exceptional circumstances, I'll repeat it, the start of the pandemic, basic civil service practices to document contract decision-making were not followed.
Yeah,
I agree.
We've got a day of disruption ahead of us, particularly if you want to travel on the trains. David, talk us through a real sort of rallying, quite an angry call to action on the front page of the Mirror.
Well, what was interesting was hearing what some of your viewers were sending in, saying, we work and are not going to get a pay rise of that scale. This sets worker against worker, and it suggests that if you haven't got muscle, you'll be forgotten. You'll be at the bottom of the list. Look, this dear fellow, Mr. Lynch, he's not so much interested in what his members will get, in my opinion. What he's interested in is how he can exploit the grievances of his members in order to bring down the government. And we've been...
Oh, he's not like that. I don't believe Mick Lynch is like that.
Outright.
Of course he would. Well, he would, wouldn't he? But at the end of it all, I travelled up quite a long distance on a train last evening. I can't now go back from whence I came because the trains aren't running. And you think, what an exercise in futility that is. But one thing is absolutely certain: the government cannot afford to give way to these people, because my grandfather, both of my grandfathers at different stages in their careers were railway workers. So I'm nothing against railway workers. But one of the things I'm quite certain of, as I sat there and watched a rather jovial guard making quite funny announcements as we wended our way up from Dorset, I think to myself, it's not a very difficult job, actually. It's probably not as difficult as half of the jobs that the people are writing into you about. Why should they be paid more when the railways are losing money hand over fist?
Well, that's the debate. If you're a railway worker, get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk.